If you'd like to read along with me, we'll be in John chapter 15, verses 1 through 6. John 15, 1 through 6. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it may be bearing fruit, more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. Kolton Sneed comes to us from that place where it supplies a long line of people who have come to us, Pueblo, Colorado. Is it any surprise that he made the decision to come? Kolton's worked as a security guard. I want a builder of countertops, an assembly technician. You can almost look at that list of jobs and see his mind turning, thinking about doing something more productive. And I'm glad that he made the decision to come to Sunset and study. Little did he know there would be a lot of transitions that would occur during his life and his time here at Sunset. He first of all came to AIM. I remember that first class, this tall kid meandered into the classroom. I got to know him. He's rather quiet. He's a man of many words, as we all know. Kolton is worked his way through the AIM study. He went to the field in Bolivia. Lucky for him. What a blessing. He met his wife, Sarvia, and married, has continued his studies here. Now he is preparing to head to the mission field. And also mention here that their time while in school was spent in Amherst, and he had the opportunity to do some preaching and teaching while there. Kolton, do you have any guests with you this morning that you'd like to introduce, please?
This is Clinton Sawyer. He's one of our brothers at Amherst Church of Christ, and he decided to come and watch me preach this morning. I don't know why I'm going to preach the same sermon on Sunday. She's not really a guest, but she's an aide assistant at my sister Rachel.
When he was asked the question, what or who influenced you to come to Sunset, he said, I knew what I needed to be doing. And he began to prepare himself to do that as he entered the studies in AIM and continued those in Sunset. When asked about his joys and his trials, Kolton responded, I have a much stronger faith. Certainly as you get into the Word of God, you're going to deepen your understanding and knowledge, and that walk with God is going to be a very important one. It went through several trials. You know, he struggles, he says homework, reading, just the wear and tear on the body. He says he feels like he's aged 10 years. Nothing like having to teach, you know. I feel like I've aged 20. Maybe I have. I know that in every student's walk, there's a measure of this confidence in God's ability to work in us and learning how to trust God more, knowing that life's path takes a lot of bends and turns. Kolton has begun to see that and recognize it, and I think particularly it's demonstrated in this decision to venture halfway around the world and enter the mission field of Saipan. What an interesting destination as well as an opportunity, and I pray that God will use your abilities and mature you and enable you and Sarvia to be very effective missionaries on that field. And so, as we always do, we want to invite you to come and preach the word.
Good morning. Thank you, Gibby, for that introduction. Thank you for my two guests for being here. This is my third and final chapel sermon, or whatever you want to call it, with our time here in Sunset. So I'm glad for that in a lot of ways, but it's a little bit bittersweet, but mostly sweet. Gibby read for us John chapter 15, verses 1 through 6. And if you paid attention to what he was reading, we know this section is talking about bearing fruit. I'm not really going to focus on that in the main body of my sermon. I think it's worth talking about it a little bit. So what is bearing fruit? I think bearing fruit is doing our job as a Christian. I think about it this way, just like a vine in Jesus' example, or let's think about it in a way that maybe we understand better, like an orange tree. What's an orange tree's job? To make oranges, right? And so if an orange tree is bearing fruit, this orange tree is doing its job. It's making oranges. Here in West Texas, cotton plants. They plant those cotton plants. What's that plant's job? Make cotton, so they can harvest it in the fall and maybe even into the winter sometimes. And that's how everybody makes their money around here, apparently. What's the cotton plant's job? Make cotton. What's an orange tree's job? Make oranges. What's a vine's job? To make grapes. What's our job? To bear fruit. So then let's talk a little bit about what is this fruit that we're supposed to be bearing. I've heard some people say, well, that fruit we're supposed to be bearing is new converts. I think maybe that's part of it, but I don't think that's the whole thing. That's the whole fruit that we're supposed to bear. New converts is definitely something that we should look into, if you want to put it that way. How about the fruit of the Spirit? That's an easy connection to make. They're both called fruit, so yeah, it must be that, right? Because it says right there, that's fruit. I think that's also part of it. Bearing fruit is doing our job. So I think any of the commandments or anything that we find in the Bible that says you do this, if we're doing that, we're bearing fruit. Did you see verses 4 and 5? I'm going to read them again. John 15, 4 and 5. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. In honor of my favorite Sunset teacher, Kevin Haynes. Did you catch that? Apart from me, you can do nothing. In other words, if we're connected to Jesus, then we can bear fruit. If we're not connected to Jesus, then we cannot bear fruit. So I think you're finding the main thrust of what I'm going to be talking about this morning, staying connected to Jesus. If you're connected, you bear fruit. If you're not connected, you don't. You can't. We talk about your spiritual disciplines or just reading your Bible or going to some workshop or what have you, and we talk about it as if it's recharging our batteries. I think we're making a big mistake if we
talk about our spirituality, our relationship with God, as having batteries. I don't think it's batteries that can be uncharged and recharged. I think it has to stay connected. I think it's more like an outlet that has to be plugged in order to be functioning. Like a refrigerator. What happens if you unplug a refrigerator? It stops working. It stops making whatever you have in it cold. It's not doing its job. If you have it plugged in, it's doing what a refrigerator is supposed to do, make stuff cold. I think that's how our spiritual life and our job as a Christian to bear fruit, I think that's how it works. We have to stay plugged in. You can't plug it in, get charged up real quick, like these high-speed wireless computers that we all carry in our pocket. It's giving everybody cancer. I don't think it works like that. I think it has to stay plugged in, like a landline. Remember those? It has to stay plugged in. So how do we stay connected? How do we stay plugged in? We're going to look at a few biblical examples that I thought of, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it, and then we'll wrap it up, and that'll be it. So first biblical example that I thought of is Jesus himself. Obviously, Jesus isn't staying connected to himself because he is himself. Jesus is staying connected to the Father. And how do we see this all through the Bible? How many times do we read, and I don't have a number written down, I didn't bother to look it up. How many times do we read that Jesus went off by himself to pray or to do whatever he was doing by himself? See, and again, here we talk about that as if he's going off to charge his batteries, recharge his batteries. He's on 5% and his phone's telling him, hey, you need to plug me in right now. No, I don't think it works that way. I think he was never unplugged in the first place. I look at it more as preventative maintenance. He was going off by himself to knock off the cobwebs and all the stuff. Have you ever moved your refrigerator? Have you seen the amount of garbage and dust and cobwebs underneath your refrigerator? I think that's what he was doing. He's going off by himself to clean that stuff out, to keep it running smoothly. How many times do we read that Jesus looked up before he performed some sort of miracle? I think he's saying a little prayer when he does that. I think he's saying, here we go again, God. Help me with this one. And then, bam, he does it. What about David, King David? If you remember Michael Jimenez, who came and spoke in chapel, this has been probably a couple months ago now. He graduated a few years ago. He said something that I wrote down because I thought it was interesting. By the way, teachers, that's how my notes work. That's why I don't take a lot of notes, because if you say something interesting, then I write it down. But he said, God spent a lot of time with David because David spent a lot of time with God. I love that. God spent a lot of time with David because David spent a lot of time with God. How many Psalms did David write? Charles is going to get mad at me because I don't remember the exact number. 70-something, I know that. 70-something Psalms, almost half of them, that he wrote to God, about God. It's just him talking to God or him talking about God or his prayers to God with whatever's going on in his life because he's staying connected to God. One of Sarvi and I's favorite stories happens in 1 Samuel chapter 30. I'm probably not going to read it, but 1 Samuel 30. David and his men, David's not quite king yet, Saul's still around, and David is living in Ziklag. Him and his men are gathered together, and they're off at some battle or war, whatever they have going on. And they come home to Ziklag, and they find out the Amalekites have come and taken their women, taken their wives and their children. They come home to Ziklag to find the town burned down and their women gone. What does David do? He says, bring me the ephod. And he prays to God, God, should we go get these guys and get our women back? Man, how many of us, if this happened, let's say we come to school this morning and we find out the people of Shallow Water came and took all of our women and children. How many of us are riding over to Shallow Water right now without even thinking twice? What did David do? He asked God first. Should we go get our women back? Should we go get these guys? Of course, God says, go take care of it, and they do. It's one of our favorite stories in the Bible. That happens so many times in the life of David that as you read through 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st Chronicles even, it happens a lot where David asks God first before he does something. What do we know about a time when he didn't ask God first? I can think of a couple right off the top of my head. When's the last time you asked God first? And here's a few practical ideas about how we can stay connected to Jesus now in our time. Stay connected to the church. There's an idea. Stay connected to the body, which is connected to the head. I don't think I'm blowing anybody's mind here when I say your body is connected to your head. Stay connected to the body because the body is connected to the head. We will be tempted to disconnect from the body. I have been many times in my life. You guys know I'm kind of a negative person, so stuff happens and I'm like, I'm just going to stop going to church. I'm going to go somewhere. I don't know anybody in Utah. I'm going to Utah because I don't know anybody that lives over there. I'm being ridiculous. The church is Jesus' wife, Jesus' body. You know, as a married man, and married men, tell me if I'm wrong here, but if somebody disrespects your wife, they're disrespecting you, am I right? The same is true for the church. If we disrespect Jesus' wife, then we're disrespecting Jesus. Stay connected to the church. Jesus works through the church. We get to see God's kindness in the church. We get to see God's forgiveness in the church. You ever just look around and think about all the things all those people have been forgiven of? Then I would say, well, look at yourself. Look at all those things you've been forgiven of. It's amazing. Stay connected to His Word. My classmates have probably heard me say, I can't wait to get out of here so that I can actually learn something. Now's our time, because we have time to study what we want to study. We have time to chase those rabbits that we didn't have time to chase because we had to write a 12-page paper on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. 15, wow. Stay connected to His Word. The Word is living and active. I have experienced this. This year, at the end of this year, it will be my 5th time reading through the entire Bible. Sarvi and I have been, for the last 5 years, reading through the entire Bible in 1 year. This year is my 5th year. Sarvia has read through it almost 10 times. The shortest amount of time she did it in was 8 months, so she's pretty impressive. Every single year, this is my 5th year, every single year something pops out of the pages to me. How did I never notice this before? And sometimes you find something, it's like, I'm pretty sure Paul or whoever was writing that to me. The Word is living and active. Stay connected to His Word. God speaks through His Word. He teaches through His Word. Stay connected to it. Stay connected to Jesus and God in prayer More than just praying before your meals, before lunch and dinner, or whatever other meals you eat. More than just praying before you go to bed at night. There's nothing wrong with do all of that, but pray other times too. Remember me talking about Jesus looking up before he did a miracle. I think he's saying a little prayer there. We can do the same thing. Maybe we can't perform a miracle. But a situation arises, what's preventing us from looking up and saying, here we go, God, help me with this? That's all it takes. So stay connected to Jesus. Stay plugged in to Jesus. Because apart from him, we can do nothing. Stay connected when you face challenges. That's when we want to disconnect, right? Challenges come up and all of a sudden we want to start unplugging everything. Like, no, I'll talk to you later, God. I got to take care of this. Think about the challenges that we faced these last 2 years, some of us that are graduating 3 years. Reading commentaries, that's a challenge. Commentaries are not made to be read like a regular book. I'm sorry, teachers. We're not supposed to read that like that. They're reference books. More serious, COVID. How many of us got it these last 2 years? Yeah. Or just the rules with COVID. Having to stay home for, seemed like months sometimes because somebody got sick or multiple people got sick. What about the heartache and the loss that we faced in these last 2 years? You know what I'm talking about. What about now? Moving on from here. We're almost done. Moving on from here. What are the challenges that we're going to face moving on from here? We're leaving the sunset bubble. We're going into the real world now. We're going to be facing real world problems. I'm not saying sunset's not real, but what are some of these real world problems? What about money? We all got into preaching and ministry for the money, right? Maybe you won't have enough. Maybe you'll have more than enough. What about apathy? As you go into whatever congregation or field you're going into, you're going to find some apathetic people who don't care, that don't take it seriously. What about hostility? Inside and outside of the church. Think about the apostles. What sort of challenges did those guys face? How many times were they arrested? Those guys are our heroes. They spent a lot of time in prison. What about, we just finished studying 2 Corinthians with Gibby. What about that list in 2 Corinthians chapter 11? Verse 23 through 27. I'm not going to read it because I'm almost out of time. The beatings and the whippings and the stoning and shipwreck and constant danger all the time. I've talked about it before. What do you think Paul looked like? Not like, well, did he have a big nose or a small nose? But he was probably maybe 50-something when he's writing a lot of these books. Maybe. The later books, he's maybe 50-something. He probably looked like he was 70-something. Because of all the physical abuse and torture that he had been through in his life. He was in rough shape. I'd be willing to bet he was in rough shape. What about Jesus? What sort of challenges did he have to go through? I've asked this question before in a sermon. What makes us so special? If these guys, the heroes of our faith, the best Christians there's ever been, including Christ himself, if they had to go through all of this, what makes us so special that we don't have to do that? So stay connected. Stay plugged in to Jesus. Brothers and sister, I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. I'm quoting Lord of the Rings, sorry. A day may come when we are persecuted for our faith, when we are mocked and imprisoned by our fellow man. Stay connected to Jesus. An hour of suffering and strife when hope seems to be too far away. Stay connected to Jesus, because apart from him, we can do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kolton. Stay connected to Jesus, stay connected to the body, stay connected to his word.